All right, lock in.
8, 7, 6.
Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are at the desk. In today's episode, we will be talking about the first 50 days of the second Trump administration, diving into the Alien Enemies Act, and exploring some global traditions around St. Patrick's Day. Now come, take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to the At the Desk Politics panel. President Trump had a busy start to his second term, to say the least, with almost 100 executive orders being signed, a fiery joint address to Congress, and several direct challenges to the federal bureaucracy. President Trump has certainly not been relaxing too much in the Oval Office. So, President Trump has been making headlines recently, a lot of headlines. And I want to start with one of his biggest campaign promises, which was immigration reform and immigration deportations, more border enforcement, things like that. So far, in February of 2025, there have been only 8,347 border encounters. Compared to February 2024, there were over 140,000. So, and that's just one of the numbers we can use here. He's also tried to use the Alien Invasion Act of 1798 to deport members of the Tren de Aragua gang. I love saying that. And he's been trying to do that. Federal judges have blocked it. So, Jordan, I want to start with you. What are your thoughts on his immigration policies and his enforcement so far?
I mean, he did make immigration a very big part of his campaign, and we're definitely seeing that playing out now, especially, like you said, with him invoking the Alien Enemies Act, which, to kind of put that into context, it's only been used 3 times, and it's usually during times of major war. So I think it's interesting that we're now seeing that act being invoked in a time that, Congress hasn't declared war, and we're not in a war, officially in a war-torn time. But I also think Tom Homan has definitely been doubling down on these deportations. He was saying how he plans to continue these aggressive roundups and removals despite the court's ruling and injunctions to halt them. And I think that's where it gets into a bit of a tricky territory, because we have federal courts and judges trying to kind of put a pause on this and to make sure we're doing all these things legally. Meanwhile, we're seeing Homan really pushing forward with these efforts. And it kind of brings into question, like, is this the right thing to be doing right now?
I mean, just go off what you were saying, I think it kind of gives us a little bit of a constitutional crisis if the Trump administration has been given court orders and they're choosing not to follow them. Like you said yesterday, there was the planes that were shipping those you said gang members off to El Salvador. The court order was given to stop that flight. They continued the flight anyway. Now they're still trying to figure out the whole time. The judge specifically is trying to figure out the timeline of when he sent that order versus when the flights were actually in the air. But even then, you got Homan saying, regardless of that, I don't care what the judges think, which I think can kind of serve as a test for the rest of the Trump administration and their policies over, will they ignore these judges? Because the judges have no real power to stop them.
I think it's really interesting that we're seeing this kind of interplay between the executive and then the judiciary, because we in the US, we kind of pride ourselves on this system of checks and balances that we have. But when we have somebody who is like Trump, who really is used to steamrolling his way to getting what he wants, it's very funny because, like you said, like the judiciary doesn't really have any real enforcement power to do these types of stuff. So checks and balances really coming to the test. And we see with even Chief Justice Roberts, who's kind of pushing back against Trump's calls to impeach the federal judge that has been blocking his orders when it comes to immigration. This butting of heads between the executive and the judiciary is really interesting for me to see. I want to also look at take away now from like the Venezuelan immigrants and talk about like the Arab immigrants that he's been talking about and like really, I guess, setting his sights on. We had 2 instances with Mahmoud Khalil from Colombia and a professor, I don't remember her name, but Lebanese professor in Brown, who have been like either deported or like under threats of deportation while being U.S. permanent residents and green card holders. So this is unprecedented waters that we're going into because you don't really hear a lot about presidents trying to deport like U.S. permanent residents. So I'm interested and a little scared to see how that's going to happen. But I think it's really changing the way or the conversation around immigration in the U.S.
I mean, there's really not much I can add at this point. I mean, we've touched on everything in terms of this matter, but I do agree with what you said with us sleepwalking outside of the democracy, with the whole situation of judges making rulings and then enforcement not following their own rules and not enforcing rules on themselves. It's dangerous. And I think we're starting to see this in a lot of different ways. Like, for example, President Trump, this is a whole nother neck of the woods, but President Trump offering now to take money from other people to have a sit down with him. I mean, these are all ways, and this was highlighted in Congress, of President Trump basically just defying our Constitution and defying our democracy and just basically doing what he can to enrich himself. And we're seeing that too with Howard Lutnick. It's just very dangerous the way we're seeing some of these people like himself and his bureaucracy act. And I think it's very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I will say is I'm not exactly sure why that judge wanted those gang members to not be deported. I'd have to question what his intention was there. However, he did make a ruling, and we do have checks and balances. So I do see where the conflict comes in because, yes, we have 3 branches. We have legislative, we have executive, and we have judicial. And Trump wants to use as much power as possible to get his agenda done. And what we also have to keep in mind is that the majority of Americans do support Trump's moves on immigration. Not every issue, but immigration was the issue that he won big on in the election. And most Americans believe that gang members should be deported. I think a lot of Americans believe that any illegal immigrant should be deported. So it comes down to like the will of the American people and also the balance of the government.
But I also have to wonder, like, were they really expecting this extent? Because I think one of the worries that I have personally is that things like, are they gang members, are they drug dealers, are they criminals, are not necessarily being fully, fully...
I know what you're trying to get at
Given
here.
like a fair process.
Given a full fair process, and it's not being like fully confirmed that these people are
a part of this gang.
A part of this gang or criminals in general. Like I said, we have a professor who has residency status being deported when it's like, when has that ever happened? And this is a professor. Who else would we want in our country besides the ones who are teaching the next generation of leaders and scholars and scientists and things like that? We have a student from Colombia, again, U.S. permanent resident, who is also under threat of being deported for protesting, which is protected under our constitutional rights. So I understand not wanting to have criminals in the country, and I understand wanting to make sure that people who are coming in are doing so in the legal manner. But number one, it's hard. It's super, super hard to get into the U.S. And number two, when it's seeming like these deportations are just happening with abandon, with no real due process investigation going on. It's like, okay, well, does he really care about the criminals, or is it just like a flex of power?
Well, and I also think something interesting, and you guys both touched on this, is that the Trump administration was very insistent that the plane was already out of U.S. Jurisdiction by the time that the court had processed the order. But the thing that's interesting to me is then you have Tom Homan saying he, despite the court's rulings and injunctions, is going to keep doing what he's doing. So it's kind of that like juxtaposition of they're saying, oh, well, like it was already out of our hands. We couldn't do anything about it. But then on the other side of this, you have him saying, I don't care what you say. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. So then does that mean that they knew they were in the wrong with saying it was out of U.S. jurisdiction and they knew they probably should have stopped it and they didn't? But who knows?
I mean, they're not giving the judge specific times either. The judge has been talking to the DOJ all day about the actual specifics of the takeoffs, and they're not actually giving him anything regarding that. He's not giving him any facts or anything like that. So it's really up in the air over whether he gave that order in time. But I'd also like to touch on what you were talking about, how it's really scary how this administration is now allowed to just come in and basically kidnap someone that is a permanent U.S. resident. He has a green card. Just for his views, for his actions, for his protests that are protected. it's a scary thing. It's a dangerous precedent, and who knows how he's going to employ that on other people that he disagrees with. I mean, Rubio said they'll go after anyone who's also promoting terrorism, quote unquote, like they claim he does. So it's going to be really interesting to see like who else is going to be picked up as a result of this, or who's going to be too afraid to go out and protest out of fear of being
It's
possibly
definitely a
deported.
nuanced conversation. And, I think that when you have a mass deportation operation, when you have a massive immigration reform, there is always going to be collateral damage. In other words, there are going to be some people who may have not done something wrong that might get hurt or deported improperly. And that is unfortunate. But when you have something on this scale, I think things like that just kind of happen. And it is unfortunate when you're having just this many people.
It hurts
moved
right
around.
to free trial too.
It does hurt that. But again,
But then I'm wondering if it should just be downsized then. Like, I understand his objective, but I think that you can't really call uprooting people from their lives that they've worked so hard to build in a country that, at times is very difficult to live in. You can't call uprooting their lives and that amount of emotional distress that comes with it. You can't call that collateral damage. I feel like that's so reductive and very diminutive of the experience that they go through. And it's not something that should happen. It's unfortunate because it should not happen simply. Like, there should be better mechanisms and better vetting processes to ensure that people who deserve to be here are not being lumped into the same category as criminals, as rapists, as gang members. Because it's like, then do you really care about people's rights at all?
Right. It takes away the humanity, because at the end of the day, we're
and it
seeing,
always comes back to that.
It should be a case-by-case process, as you said. And the Trump administration did at one point commit to hiring more judges. And they also at one point admitted that they wanted to build more courts and create more opportunities. And they were also looking at opening places like Gitmo, just as opportunities to hold people while they go through these legal processes. And it seems to me like we are certainly sleepwalking away from a democratic process, especially in this situation and in other processes too, for sure. But specifically in this situation, it is dangerous what the president is playing with. But at the same time, I don't want to use the word mandate, but the president was elected for this reason. So it's difficult to weigh both options, but you have to remember at the end of the day that everyone's human and that everyone deserves a trial.
I want to move. 1 second. We do have to move on. We've been on stop for a long time.
Well, she wants to.
I know
she wants
that.
to bridge it. Give her a minute. Give her a minute.
Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds. Go fast.
I've said this before on these episodes, and I'll say it again. And like you said, Ryan, the humanitarian effects of what deportation and immigration reform can do, and like you were saying, when it's mass deportation, are they really going through those checks and balances to make sure that they're not uprooting people who should be here, but really making sure that they're getting people that are criminals that they're trying to target? But I think, again, we lose sight that these people are humans, and we need to have compassion when we're going through these times.
And then we also have to balance that with the fact that a lot of people are frustrated with, as you said, the immigration process. Now, not all statistics thrown in our face are true. That's another story. But the fact that President Trump was elected on one of the bases of saying he's going to be harsh on immigration is also true.
Yeah, so I want to move to another campaign promise, ending the wars. So Israel-Palestine, that's not going too well right now. However, Ukraine-Russia is making some progress. President Trump
Depends on
is making progress.
Progress is
the infrastructure ceasefire has been signed today, or has been confirmed today with a phone call with Putin. They are making progress towards a ceasefire. Now, does that mean Putin might gain some territory after the ceasefire deals are signed? Maybe.
Yes.
Possibly. I wouldn't say yes for sure, but I'd say possibly. However, people will stop dying in the war. So what do you guys think about this ceasefire deal?
Well, people won't actually stop dying in the war because they're still allowing targets and attacks on civilians and military, whoever else. The ceasefire is really only for energy.
But I'm saying once the real
sources on both
ceasefire is
sides.
signed after this one, then people stop dying.
It's just we don't know what Putin is going to want to allow. We don't know whether he really wants a ceasefire or he's okay with these kind of like ambiguous talks over a ceasefire where he's allowed to just keep fighting, keep pushing, keep making gains into that Ukraine region, or just keeping people distracted while he does so. It's really concerning because Trump is giving Putin so much leeway here when it comes to the ceasefire situation, where he's really able. It just puts Zelensky in a hard position where he has no leverage. He's going to be at the will of what Trump and Putin want when it comes to making these concessions once the ceasefire hopefully does happen.
I think it's so interesting, this conversation of Ukraine giving up territory, because I don't know, it just kind of feels so like once upon a time. I thought in this day and age, we're past the point of countries giving up.
Colonialism.
Right, let's call it what it is.
It's also imperialism.
We're past the point of colonialism, imperialism, use them interchangeably. I'm gonna be that annoying kid that won't shut up about their abroad experience. But when I was in Kazakhstan, the story that I'm focusing on is Kazakhstan's geopolitical position being bordered with Russia and China. And a sentiment, a very real sentiment that exists there is that Russia is going to set its sights on Kazakhstan next, because there's already talks of, oh, this region of Kazakhstan was once Russian and things like that. And I think that we also need to look at just the wider implications of this Russian-US collaboration relationship.
Mhm.
It's taking a very interesting turn. So I think giving Putin like what he wants is kind of like, you know, I've never been like a huge like supporter of like US hate against Russia. I'm like, you know, they're just chilling over there, I guess. But I think it's very interesting how somebody who is a textbook dictator is getting like so much, I guess, like is receiving so many concessions from what's supposed to be the pinnacle of democracy. And this happens every time, guys. Like these is like textbook history steps that we've seen over and over again, where, you know, the US gets friendly with like a kind of dictatorial power and it comes back and it bites us in the rear eventually. So we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, I hope people stop dying. That is the goal always. But I think this sets a very interesting precedent where somebody that you would call a dictator, without mincing your words, is really allowing to kind of do whatever he wants.
It's what concerns me is the lack of attention to him being a dictator from this new administration. It's scary. I touched on it in the last episode. A lot has changed since then, but also I am a firm believer that we're not seeing as much progress as Rubio is claiming we are seeing. Now, don't get me wrong, Rubio is working very, very hard, but the angle he's taking historically just doesn't work very well. We saw Chamberlain do it in World War II. It's not the most successful angle to take.
So my question to the people who are criticizing Trump's current moves are, what is the solution? Because we just had a President Biden.
That is the point where you're right.
Who was super hard on Putin. He talked all this trash about him during Trump's term. Hillary the whole time was saying Trump is a Russian agent, this and that. The Russia hoax that happened in his first term. Trump was always kind of sympathetic with Putin, but Putin did not gain any ground during Trump's first term. So does talking tough on Putin really achieve anything? I don't think it does. I think that Biden and the U.S. came off as telephone tough guys.
But also Putin didn't invade Russia in Trump's first term, right? Am I tripping? Am I getting the timeline wrong?
Putin did not know. So what happened was Putin gained ground in 2014, but did not gain any ground under Trump.
Okay, there you go. But
Yes.
I think you have a point that obviously this whole like tough talking, you know, the saying is you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, right? But I also think that this kind of 21st century appeasement strategy that we're going for is a slippery slope. I feel like there is supposed to be a middle ground between like, you know, drawing a line and being a bit more friendly than we might want to. I think my biggest thing here is that Ukraine is the victim in this. Well, seemingly, if you want to paint it in black and white terms, Ukraine would be seen as the victim in this, and I feel like they've been sidelined completely from these conversations of ceasefire, of peace deals. You know, so there's this idea of, oh, we're doing this so people on both sides stop dying. But from my perspective, it seems like Ukraine is not really getting a say when they're the one that's being invaded.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point because, again, these conversations are happening today, and let's call that what that is. It's just a conversation. We still have yet to see the actions that come from it, but the fact that Ukraine wasn't involved in these conversations and the fact that it really feels like we're buddying up with Russia and we want to make them happy. And you're right, it's a tough balance between, do we want to be hard on Putin or do we want to catch flies with honey? But it just feels like Ukraine's not as in the picture as it should be at this moment. And it's just interesting to see how all of this plays out and if Zelensky's going to get on board with these discussions.
I mean, Putin has made it no secret in the past that he would love to reunite a lot of the states that were part of the former union. And it's just, we give him so much leeway here. He has about, if they cut it up today, he would about have 20% of Ukraine's old territory. It's ended today. It's that for now, but when does he want a little more? When does he want parts of Kazakhstan or any of the other states bordering Russia? And he will have reason to believe that he can easily do so and not have much pushback from the West, or specifically the United States.
Well, that's the other thing. Like you said, colonialism, we've learned about that in history. We've seen how that plays out. The fact that we're kind of shifting into this place where, oh, you know what? Yeah, we're going to take some of that land. We're going to take that back. That's not how the world works anymore.
I'm not sure if I'd call Russia trying to regain the Soviet Union colonialism. I don't think it's right, but I wouldn't call it
Imperialism.
colonialism.
It's getting the old band
It's
back
getting-
together.
it's getting-
imperialism.
you can call it-
What would you call it, Jackson?
I would call it
Imperialism.
reuniting what was there in the 1980s, and it's
But
wrong.
it's not
It's
theirs
wrong.
for the taking.
But I wouldn't compare it to colonialism. per
Okay,
se.
why?
You would call it
why not?
imperialistic. Though.
You can
would
call it
say-
imperialistic,
So
Which is kind of the same thing.
does Trump
not necessarily.
does Trump deserve Greenland?
I think Trump deserves Greenland if he earns it. I think
does that mean?
That's-
I think
wait, no, I'm
I
curious.
I think that if
Well, it's
Denmark,
it's interesting. I did not
think
expect that answer. That was good. That was good.
I think that if Denmark gives up Greenland fair and square, then we'll have Greenland. I don't have a strong opinion on that.
They're not
Okay,
going
but
to
does
give up
Greenland have the right? Do the people have the democratic right to decide who rules them and what laws that they should follow?
It depends completely on their sovereignty and exactly and
Okay.
it depends on who owns them. If Denmark
Right.
is if
So
Denmark
Ukraine believes in their sovereignty, that they're their
Mhm.
own state, and that is the argument here: is that they deserve their own state, and they feel that Trump is not backing them as a fellow democratic nation.
And that's the thing. Then that's why I would call it colonialism as well, is because there's this aspect of forcefulness. If
Mhm.
Mhm.
Ukraine or if parts of Ukraine, successfully
Willingly.
secede
Mm.
from
But that's
Ukraine
not what's
and they
happening.
say we want to reform a federation with Russia, that's completely different. That's just two countries forming a federation. Happening on my home continent right now.
Mhm.
That's a decision and that's a conversation that's being had, that's happening. When it's happening with force, whether it's military force or coercive force, that's when it gets into the territory of like, okay, like this is not sovereignty. This is not respect for
Mhm.
another country's sovereignty over their own boundaries, because the USSR collapsed. It's no longer there. So what gives Russia the right to just up and decide one day like, oh, I want to get back
this.
to what it was before? Because then the UK could just be like, oh, you know what? I want Nigeria back. I want Tanzania back. I want India back. You know what I'm saying?
And the
it's
U.S. is
setting
getting
a
the Panama
precedent.
Canal back.
Exactly.
I mean, those Russian
geopolitics,
nationals.
we have to keep in mind though, in geopolitics, idealism isn't always what happens. It's about pragmatism. It's about who has the bigger weapons and who wins. So with that being said, I do think the U.S. should try to preserve Ukraine as much as possible without spending an obnoxious amount of money. That's my personal opinion. However, the first priority should be stopping death.
Right,
should
but
be
is it
stopping death.
idealism to say that a country that's been sovereign for however many years should stay sovereign? Is that
It's-
idealism?
Putin,
I would call it idealism, yes.
Putin did
for the
say in his
situation.
concessions he would
Okay.
want a stoppage of all weapons and funds being sent to Ukraine.
Mhm. It's an interesting and it is a bit of a scary situation, but sadly that is all the time we have for today. What are your thoughts on Trump's performance so far? Please leave a comment and let us know what you'd like to see covered next on the politics panel. Next, we'll hand over to our very own Brady Welsh to give us a rundown of the old and controversial Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Over to you, Brady.
Thanks, Jackson. The Alien Enemies Act of 1798 was one of the 4 acts signed into law by President John Adams as part of his highly controversial Alien and Sedition Acts. These acts were signed as a direct result of the Quasi-War, which was an undeclared naval conflict between the U.S. and France between 1798 and 1800. The war started as a result of the U.S. declaring neutrality in the French Revolution, and because of that, the French seized all American ships trading with Great Britain. After the XYZ affair, in which France refused to negotiate peace talks with the U.S. without a bribe, anti-French sentiment swept over the U.S., causing the 4 Alien and Sedition Acts to be approved by the Federalist Party. The Naturalization Act increased the number of years required for immigrants to become citizens from 5 to 14. The Alien Friends Act allowed the deportation and imprisonment of non-citizens. The Sedition Act made criticism of the federal government a criminal offense, both silencing and imprisoning Democratic Republican journalists across the country. And the Alien Enemies Act allowed the president to detain male non-citizens of enemy countries above the age of 14 during times of war or invasion. The Alien Enemies Act is the only one of these acts that has been in effect past 1802, and multiple presidents since John Adams have not been afraid to use it. James Madison used it against British nationals during the War of 1812. Woodrow Wilson changed the act to include all males and proceeded to invoke it against the nationals of the Central Powers during World War I. But the most brutal use of the act came from Franklin Roosevelt during World War II. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he used the act to declare Americans of German, Italian, and Japanese descent as alien enemies, and took it a step further by implementing the 10 Japanese internment camps, which forcibly relocated over 120,000 Japanese Americans, about 60% of which were legal American citizens. Since then, no president had invoked the Alien Enemies Act until the reason we're talking about it today. One of President Trump's biggest issues that he campaigned on was the staggering number of illegal immigrants coming into the U.S. under the watch of his opponent, Vice President Harris and President Biden. It seemed like every speech he was hammering home the danger they posed to U.S. citizens, often citing the murder of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley. As a result, he promised to invoke the Alien Enemies Act in both a September campaign speech and his inaugural address. As of Saturday, he officially became the first president to use the Alien Enemies Act on the basis of invasion, with the goal being to speed up deportations and to officially declare the Venezuelan transnational criminal organization Tren de Aragua as an alien enemy, as they pose a serious threat to U.S. citizens. Invoking this act, of course, hasn't been a hit with everyone, as U.S. District Judge James Boasberg blocked its use for up to 2 weeks later that same day, but not before over 200 suspected members of Tren de Aragua were deported to El Salvador. Many Americans alike are also concerned with the invocation of such a large part of the main reason John Adams was such an unpopular president. This raises the questions. Will Trump go as far as Roosevelt did? Will he reinstate other aspects of the Alien and Sedition Acts later on in his presidency? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. For now, let's send it over to the history panel as they talk everyone's favorite Irish holiday, St. Patrick's Day. Take it away, Brandon.
Thank you, Brady. He's right, folks. Yesterday was, in fact, everyone's favorite holiday. Now, you may notice two of us on this panel are, in fact, somewhat Irish-looking. And yes, I'm referring to myself and Audrey, not Shay and Yaya. And us Irish-adjacent folk like to celebrate our pseudo-holiday in a plethora of ways. But around the world, there are some fascinating and eccentric methods of celebration for the luckiest day of the year. Today, we'll be shining a great green spotlight on some of those traditions. Let's get right into it. I'm very excited. I love your green jacket.
Oh, thanks. I thought I'd come in the spirit.
As you can see, this is the green side of the table.
Yes.
This is the not as green side
We're
of the
method
table.
dressers.
But that's okay. And we're ready to go. All right, let's see our first one. What do we got here? This is mine.
O'Neill, Nebraska.
O'Neill, Nebraska.
Nebraska's Irish capital. That's funny. Seeing the largest beer chug.
Shamrock, largest leprechaun, the largest running of the gingers.
So
I hope it's that one.
It's definitely not the largest leprechaun. I feel like that's a bit of an oxymoron. I feel like
From what I know about leprechauns.
Yeah, from what I know about leprechauns. From what I
The
hear.
largest leprechaun is just a 5-foot man.
It's just
Hey,
me.
not so much in our short kings, all right?
Okay, I'm gonna go with D because I really want that to be.
You got it over here, guys.
I like the Shamrock because they have the Shamrock in the O, so
Yeah,
it's calling to
true.
me.
I also like Shamrock because of what Yaya said. It's there.
Hey, copycat.
Because of what I know about you, I'm going A.
What does that mean? It was, in fact, the largest shamrock, but some modern history, some interesting lore
Oh, so it's fake though.
has been. So, yes,
All
it
right.
is fake, but it was replaced for a year by a jealous town in Vermont, otherwise known as Jericho, Vermont, a very important place during the American Revolution, mind you. But a bunch of people painted an 1,100 square foot one in the middle of a parking lot, literally just kind of to flip the bird to our friends over here in O'Neill, Nebraska,
Wow.
which just isn't cool in my opinion.
That's
I mean,
crazy
I'm not
hating.
sure of it. But O'Neill is known as the Irish capital of Nebraska, which is fantastic. There's
I
a lot
like
of-
that implies that there's an Irish capital of any state.
Right, exactly. I love the idea that, you know, there's an Irish capital in a place like Nebraska, but it became that because obviously during the 1800s when folks moved out west, you know, during the gold rush, a lot of Irish folks settled in Nebraska, which is very cool. So I'm a very big fan of O'Neill, Nebraska, and I hope to visit there someday. Maybe we could take a history panel trip.
Ooh, I would
You
love
should
that.
stand
That
on
would
the
be so
Shamrock.
fun.
I like it.
This one is mine. So in New London, Wisconsin. So was there a parade filled with gold and potatoes? Would you get fined for not wearing green? Would leprechauns change signs in the town to New Dublin? Or would they target people below 5'5" for wishes and goodness.
The quotes around leprechauns in New Dublin make me go with that.
Yeah. I may or may not have looked at this one during my research, so I'm going to just
Also that.
boldly assume that it's leprechauns in New Dublin.
Throw me in there too.
Yeah, I may or may not
Throw
have
us
this
all
one
in
in my
there.
paper, so let's go see. All in.
Yeah, so everyone's
in.
correct. So New London, leprechauns. Do we know if they're real? I
Do
won't
we know if they're
say.
fake?
Do we know if they're fake? That's what
My
I'm saying.
my box of Lucky Charms says otherwise.
Yeah. Exactly. They crawl around the city and change all the signs from New London to New Dublin for the day, even on the highway. So
I wonder how long that takes them. Like, do they start like at midnight?
I wonder
in the
how many
dark?
there are.
Right?
How many leprechauns?
I think
And how tall are these signs?
pretty tall. I mean, if they're leprechauns, they're probably not very
So
good
are they
at
bringing
changing.
ladders?
I did read what during my research it started in the 90s too. So this has
Mhm.
been happening
Yeah.
for quite some time. This is 30 years of an American town's history. Just signs changing. Do you think it's dangerous? Do you think there's folks that, I don't know.
I mean, I'm thinking about the logistics. Like, you're talking about ladders. I'm thinking like they're having each other stand on each other's shoulders.
That was
Well,
the
these
image that I
leprechauns
picked.
are
Yeah.
members of the local Shamrock
Maybe
Club.
they have leprechaun
Yeah.
EMTs in case somebody falls.
That is a very good point. I'm glad we're talking about this.
This is
I'm
very
glad this is
informative.
brought up.
This is super informative.
Why is there a town called New London in America? We fought the Revolutionary War, guys, like to
there's
get
a
away
town-
from the British.
I mean, New
A
York.
lot of
I
news.
guess
New
that is
York is-
actually very true. Never
Yeah.
mind. Let's
I'm
cut
from a
that
town
out,
called
guys.
Cumberland. Oh, the Caribbean.
This one's mine.
Ooh.
Mhm.
So as you can see in the bottom corner there, there's some interesting, somewhat sort of adjacent to what we would maybe imagine to be part of
A
the.
liberating slave revolt next
If
to
you'd let me get to it.
capturing a real life leprechaun.
Capture
Yeah,
of a real life leprechaun.
So choose wisely. We want to talk about what is the event that occurred in 1768 that led to these sort of maybe unexpected cherishings of St. Patrick's Day in the Caribbean.
I love the idea of a Caribbean island bringing potatoes to America for some reason. I find that interesting.
The Columbian Exchange.
I'm going to go with D.
I'm also gonna go with D.
Well done. You sniffed it out. It actually was a slave revolt that was held on St. Patrick's Day in 1768. This was a Caribbean island that was originally a British territory where they brought African slaves and Irish indentured servants. The two cultures, intermingled on this small island and staged a coup, basically, and liberated the island. So they've got a particular zeal for the holiday.
I would love to hear like an Irish Caribbean accent. I don't know.
Doesn't
I
it
feel
seem
like
interesting?
That just needs to, it would like
I thought it was such a cool thing.
scratch an itch in my brain that I
Mhm.
didn't know I had.
It's a very
That's-
Irish thing to do.
Yeah, it's very interesting. They actually, one of the nicknames of this island is the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean.
I read that it's the only place outside of Ireland where St. Patrick's Day is a public holiday.
That's true.
Mhm.
Interesting.
It's fantastic.
All right.
Ooh.
Okay, so
Oh.
this is me. You say Japan. So your options are they either give chocolate to ginger people, natural or not, race around Mount Fuji just for the fun of it, host an oyster festival, or do a clover hunt.
I'm gonna be a bit of a contrarian. I'll say give chocolate to ginger people. Imagine there's not too many ginger people in Japan,
Right?
so I feel like it wouldn't be that much chocolate, not that much of like a financial strain.
That's
Unless
a
they
good
dyed
point.
their
I was gonna
hair
say
like
maybe they dyed their hair just for they
Yeah,
do a
that
couple
was
of
a great
spray
point.
just to get some
Wigs.
chocolate or wigs. Wigs are always an
that's-
option.
dedication though.
I'm a mollusk guy, so
Oh, are you?
I'm gonna go the oyster festival.
Right. That's such an interesting interaction.
I actually came across this one in my research, so I'm gonna also tack on to the Oyster Festival.
Yes, so Oyster Festival it is. So, Japan is obviously an island, so they're surrounded by the sea. And they have an oyster festival in Ise, and they actually not only eat oysters, but they also shuck shellfish, which took me so much brain power to say that without stumbling over my words. But they have their little parades. They have a lot of leprechauns dancing in the streets, which I think is so funny. And then they cap off the night with seafood, which is my kind of night, to be very honest. So,
I read elsewhere that in Japan, when they do St. Patty's festivals, they do kind of traditional Irish clothing mixed with traditional Japanese clothing, which I can only imagine looks awesome.
Mhm.
Like
That's a crazy
That
traditional-
sounds
fusion.
cool.
Like green traditional.
Like a kimono
Japanese-
kilt.
Yes.
Ooh.
That's what I'm thinking of.
That could work.
That's camp.
Yeah,
I'm also
that is
imagining a
camp.
samurai wearing a kilt, which is making me very happy.
Right?
cool.
Stylish and
All right.
I
pragmatic.
love that. New Orleans. Oh man.
Louisiana.
I had much longer answers written in my original draft
Okay.
of this, but
Dyeing the swamp green is a little crazy.
is
I
everyone
have to
familiar
imagine
with
it's
the
already
common
green.
myth that
Correct.
St. Patrick's he banished all the snakes from Ireland?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I just want to
Oh
make
my
sure
god!
that
if-
option made
wait,
sense.
that's actually my worst nightmare: unleashing snakes into the city.
Well, it's kind
That-
of like reparation in a way.
never
You-
going to New Orleans.
you send back
Reparation,
one
right.
snake in for all the snakes that were
Oh, I'm
exiled.
good.
They weren't actually exiled.
Let's
but-
exile
Well,
them. Let's burn them. I don't
It
care.
is singular, so it says it's just one.
Unleashing
Yeah.
a
But what if it's like a
Just a
huge
But what if
snake?
it's huge?
It's a tiny snake, Audrey. You
A
wouldn't
boa
see it. You wouldn't find
constrictor.
it.
The streets of
Imagine saying
Louisiana.
all this, but it's actually not going to be the snake into the city,
Nope.
and that's going to be the crazy part.
What do we think, guys?
I want to say cabbage throwing
Oh,
parade.
that one was calling to me too.
feels very on brand
Me as
for
well.
NOLA.
My cabbages.
Guys.
Yeah.
What about you, Jamie?
There you go. How about
Cabbage?
that?
All right, guys.
Great
Well, you guys
reference.
are correct. It is like the cabbage throwing parade. So in 1845, when
Picture
there
is
was
great.
the potato famine in Ireland, they actually ran out of potatoes. So they started using cabbages instead because that was the next big staple food. And in Ireland, they also used bacon for their meals with a cabbage. So when the Irish immigrants came to America, they couldn't really afford the bacon. So they used corned beef, and that's how we get corned beef and cabbage for St. Patrick's Day. But
I
yeah,
love
they
corned
actually
beef.
get on floats and
I
they just
love
kind of
corned
throw these cabbages at people, but they do it underhand so they don't injure
Okay.
them.
Can you
During
imagine
tornado,
somebody
I
just
would be mad if someone hit me with
chucking
a
a
cabbage.
cabbage at
It's like
your face?
overhand. Like they spike it. Out
And
of
what
the
can you say? It's St. Patrick's Day. You can't really say nothing. You're like, well,
Exactly. Hey, you went to the cabbage throwing parade.
Yeah.
Willingly.
What did
you
you
used your
expect?
free will to go there.
Exactly.
You can't be mad if you get a cabbage thrown at you. Like that
Exactly.
is part of
Put in
the.
a whole new meaning to Cabbage Patch Kid.
I'm a fan.
Oh god, yeah.
I'm a fan. Ah, this is mine.
Gentrification.
Please elaborate
Is that
on
your
that.
term that
please.
you came up with?
Yeah.
Gentrification.
What does that mean,
Ginger
Brandon?
It's like gentrification, but
I
it's ginger.
was just about
But
to
like, what
say
does that
that.
mean?
You're gonna have to figure it out. I mean, I don't know.
The leprechauning sounds like a horror movie.
A bad one.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go with
Shamrock.
that. I think.
These are so vague.
The global
I'm like,
greening. The shamrock. Yeah, they're so vague. I want to know more.
global greening could have multiple meanings, Brandon.
I just want to hear your interpretations of it. Like, what does the leprechauning sound like to you besides a horror movie?
The leprechauning to me, like I'm wondering if like you just wake up one day and like you just maybe you step out of your door and then somebody like puts like a leprechaun costume at your doorstep and you're like by force you have to become a leprechaun for the day. You
The
know?
leprechaun.
I hope that's
By
true.
force.
By force.
By force, you must dress like a leprechaun, which
Yeah.
is low-key us today.
Well,
so
you know,
it's fine.
Right?
I will say those houses over
Sexy
there, they
leprechauns.
look like the same color as like a ginger's hair. So maybe that's the gentrification. I'm gonna go with
girl, that's a
gentrification,
read.
guys.
I'm right there with you.
Gentrification. Unfortunately. Well, what are you?
Guys, I'm gonna go with the C, the global greening.
What are you gonna go? What are you gonna go with?
Oh, well, I went with the leprechauning,
No,
but
you're going with the leprechauning. It is the global greening. So the global greening is not painting the entire country of Croatia, probably my favorite country in the world, besides America.
You don't need to do
The
that.
color
We don't
green,
care.
It is. There are
I
like
don't know.
multiple
get deported.
very famous, landmarks that are in Croatia that are green. So, for example, that is one of the famous cranes that are in the city of Rijeka, Croatia, that have been used there for about 150-ish years. My favorite part about this, though, is that there actually is an Irishman who's a very, very significant part of Croatian history. His name was Laval Nugent. Now, I can't go into his whole story because it's very in-depth, and I would recommend everyone reads up on him because he's very fascinating. But essentially, he led an army of Croatians against French occupation and carved out such an area that it was basically the entire modern-day city of Rijeka, the second largest city in Croatia. And he actually has his own castle there that turned into a museum because after he got France out of Croatia, he basically scoured the area for ancient relics and like Greek artifacts. So now his old castle is a museum of ancient artifacts of Grecian, Roman artifacts in Rijeka, Croatia, which, fun fact, is where I spent my 21st birthday. And it is my favorite city
on earth.
I
And
love
that's why I picked
exciting.
Croatia, because it's amazing.
Besides State College.
Obviously, right. They actually do this in 10 cities. They do it in Split, which is the capital, and then they do it in Rijeka, and then a few others. I mean, 8 others. I won't list them all off because I'm not going to be able to pronounce all of their names completely perfectly, but it is the global greening,
I love-
unfortunately.
I love a residence turned museum. Like that's my favorite type of museum. I
Yes.
think that's so cool.
Yeah,
That
it was in
is-
the early 1800s, and he just carved out land, and he led just a band of merry Croatians against the French and just got his land. And
Anyone who's against the French is a friend of mine.
they were like, sir, would you like a castle? He was like, as a matter of fact, I would.
As a matter of, yes. Oh, this was mine. Okay, Hot Springs, Arkansas. So, do they have the world's shortest parade? The Great Green Sprint. They dunk their mayor in a pot of green water, or catching of leprechauns in exchange for free drinks.
How humane is this catching? Like, what do you mean by catching leprechauns?
Catch and release.
Bear trap.
On the road.
So we're doing
Is this
full like
legal?
net like elephant tasers, etc. You can imagine.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with
elephant
the world's
tasers,
shortest
gotcha.
parade.
Me too. I feel like it's
Ooh.
very on brand.
I'm
What with
gonna
our talk of leprechauns.
I'll say world's shortest parade, just because I may have come across this in my research.
Oh, okay. I wonder which one I'll pick.
It is the world's shortest parade. So
Yeah.
this is on a 98-foot long street, which was declared the shortest street in everyday use in the world in the 1940s.
What
I
a
don't know if
mouthful.
that's still accurate, but it is kind of what it is right now. It is an hour-long parade, even though the street is 98 feet long. That hosts Elvis impersonators.
How slow
There's
do they
a
go?
kissing contest and other performances.
Well, that is
Kissing
fun.
contest.
Yep. So 98 feet of mono, essentially.
Oh,
I'm sorry. That was
period.
a bad joke.
Mm.
Well, that was really fun. I don't know who our exact winner was. I believe it was Jamie, actually. I think that you had the most, right?
I have no idea.
I,
Maybe I did.
you know what? Luck of the Irish. You're today's winner. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm a little
Congratulations.
mad because we worked.
Unfortunately, guys, that is all the time that we have for today. Tune in next week for the Crime Panel's riveting discussion of the infamous actions of former football star and convicted murderer Aaron Hernandez. In the meantime, stay updated with ATD on all of our socials at PSU at the desk, and let us know what you want us to see us cover next. Excuse me. Have a lucky rest of your week. We'll see you back at the desk, same time, same place next Tuesday.